Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to my favourite 10 films of 1974, or the year that I was thrown from the warm embrace of the void into this empty, cold earth. This is my favourite 10, which is obviously different from the greatest 10 films of 1974, and I'm sure when you see some of the choices you'll quickly realise that this is a favourite list and not the greatest. Now obviously I haven't seen every film made in 1974, so for example there's some Fassbinder I haven't seen. Yes, I keep talking about director series, but for some reason so far this year I just haven't got into the mood of doing director seasons yet. I will at some point, honest. So there's no Chinatown, even though I do like Chinatown a lot more than I used to. There's no Conversation by Francis Ford Coppola, even though that's one of my favourite Coppolas. There's no Captain Kronos, which is a lot of fun. There's no Lady Snowblood. So don't get too upset if your favourite film from 1974 isn't one of my favourite films from 1974. Again, 10, I could have made it more than 10, but I haven't. So the first one is a lovely little film that I enjoy every time I watch it. It's Deranged, or The Confessions of a Necrophile, directed by Jeff Gillen and Alan Ormsby, who haven't done too much, with a career best performance by Robert Blossom, who, if you don't recognise the name, you'll recognise his face. He's very young in this. This is basically about Ed Gein, but they don't use Ed Gein's name. But it's about a farmer who has a somewhat excessive worshipping relationship with his mother, who then dies, who obviously battered religion into him, and is a bit of a loner. And then we find out that he's actually been killing people and making furniture of them. Obviously Ed Gein was a big influence on another film that's on this list, and also Psycho, with furniture made of human bones and skin and various things. This is kind of shot, it's low budget, it's kind of shot as a documentary. There's even a man with a microphone that just walks into on screen, which gives it a kind of odd cookie flavour, but it's really Robert Blossom's performance. And I have some empathy for serial killers and psychopaths. Maybe not psychopaths, but they're definitely sociopaths. And just his way of fitting in, obviously, it's kind of frowned upon in society. But it's just a kind of low-key, low-budget little film. But it's got a heart of gold, even if that heart is then being devoured. Next, strange enough, also from 1974, a film that I only really got into a few years ago, and might be my favourite musical of all time now, knocking one off from 1975. and that is Phantom of the Paradise, which might actually be my favourite Brian De Palma film. Great songs by Paul Williams, who also stars as music mogul Swan. And this works so well because it's part Phantom of the Opera, it's part Faust, it's also part Picture of Dorian Gray, all thrown into the music business, again as Swan, who cheats a young composer, steals his song, and keeps the composer locked up in the Paradise Club. And strange enough, it turns into the Phantom of the Opera story, but there's so many levels in this, the score and songs themselves. It is almost a history of music, from kind of rock and roll to surf music to kind of proto metal to ballads. It's just wonderful production design, lots of satirical points about the music business and the music and the creative process in general. It's just so good, quite dark, lots of kind of fisheye lenses and just De Palma going wild. It's an absolute blast, and that comes in at number 9. Number 8 of my favourite films from 1974 is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is the massive second sight 4K, which fortunately enough isn't polished enough to get rid of the nature of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, that's the book. You could literally commit GBH on somebody with that book. What I love the most about Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not it's a horror film, because there's very few horror films that actually scare me. There's a film coming up next that does give me the willies and the heebie-jeebies, but it's not Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is just creepy. It's almost a film that if it was shot in smell-o-vision, nobody would survive. It's more about the death of the American heartland. It's more about the death of industry, as even in 1974 we're beginning to see humans being replaced by machines, in this case to kill cattle. It's machines as fodder, as consumables, obviously in this case as food. Obviously the film isn't as salubrious as the title makes it out to be. Again, it's amazing how little blood and gore there actually is in this film, but it's more just the terror. I mean, the last 20 minutes is poor Marilyn Burns just screaming her head off. Even though there's been so many sequels, they could never actually make this again to the extent of, yes, they were working in an unsafe working environment when they were filming it, and again you can just almost smell it off the film. It doesn't matter, it's got 4K, it's still, you can almost smell the pungent nature of those rooms. Yes, the acting isn't great, but the violence is done really well. It's just sudden, then it's over. Again, if you've never seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre before and you're going into expecting this blood and guts film, it's just not that. But I think as the older I get, and I'm pretty old, you appreciate kind of what the film's about more than this is supposed to be a scary film, which I've never really found it scary. It's more just about that death of community and death of neighbours and death of industry, which has just gotten worse, obviously, the Star Wars age as far as politics, and the Reagan Thatcher era in the 80s, and Greed is Good. And again, it's communities like Leatherface's family that have been left behind. There is just that classic scene, because people have actually kind of said, well, Leatherface is the hero, because these kids are essentially invading his land and invading his property. And there's that wonderful scene in the kitchen at the window where Leatherface is just confused because all of these kids keep coming into his house. So he/she is kind of just defending his own house. There's such great extras in here. You know, obviously it follows, this is kind of inspired by Ed Gein as well. But again, that idea of men dressing as their mothers, or being in, traumatized so much that they end up dressing as women. Obviously in Britain there's a long tradition of drag acts and whatever. If you look at the 70s and 80s comedy sketch shows, they don't waste any time getting into drag. But again, so on the surface, this is just a fairly important and seminal horror film, but for me I don't even think of it as a horror film. Again, it is more a kind of comment on not just American society but society in general, and just the lack of industry and the crumbling of community and neighbourhoods, basically. So, but number 7 is a film that does actually give me the willies and the heebie-jeebies at the same time. It's the only film ever directed by Saul Bass, who's more famous for doing titles. He did do some shorts, which are actually included on this release. And it's Phase 4. Now, I've picked up a couple of Vinegar Syndrome 4Ks recently, one of Cronenberg's Existenz, and I literally just got Southern Comfort in 4K through the door today, which is an absolute beautiful package. Vinegar Syndrome have announced they're going to do a 4K of Phase 4. The cover is covered with ants, but there is no way I'm getting a 4K of Phase 4. It's disturbing enough without it being in 4K. This is about scientists, Nigel Davenport and Michael Murphy, who are studying ants. As you do, this is not a giant ant film, this is a normal sized ant film. But it ends up the ants might be studying them. And there's a couple of bits that have been burned into the retina of my mind's eye ever since I watched this. One is a clenched fist, that's all I'll say. The most disturbing clenched fist scene in cinema history. And one involves a pit with lots of holes in it. It's an odd little film, beautifully shot. I'm sure it will look wonderful in 4K, but I'm not buying a 4K Phase 4, I'm sorry. Not to be confused with a Dean Cain film called Phase 4, straight to video, forgettable mess. This is Saul Bass's Phase 4, and it is disturbing as hell if you're that way inclined. Number 6 is a film is a film that I didn't really understand as a young person watching it, but it's a film that I've just grown to appreciate more and more and more. And it's John Boorman's Zardos. Apart from anything, this is one of my favourite steelbooks that I have. It's absolutely gorgeous. And there's Sean Connery in his red nappy. Very much like The Offence, Sean Connery is playing a very nasty character. And again, there's a lot in this. It's about Sean Connery's Brutes, and it's about paganism, it's about god worship. Charlotte Rampling. It's kind of a world where different little populations from the people who never grow old. It's a fairy tale, but it's a dark fairy tale. It's very relevant as far as kind of religious idolatry and idolatry of other means. It's absolutely beautiful. Plus, John Boorman is one of the best directors for commentaries, and his commentary on Zardos is absolutely wonderful, as is his on Excalibur. It's one of Sean Connery's best performances because he's not playing a nice guy, he is playing a brute who doesn't understand the different societies he goes into after climbing into the big head, which we've all done. Number 5, which is the only foreign language film, which is quite disturbing. But again, this is my favourite 10 films of the year of my exit from the void. Not the greatest 10 films in 1974. That would probably have more non-English language films. But at number 5, it's Bresson's Lancelot de Lac. Rewatching this recently, I always liked it, but this is spectacular. On Blu-ray for the first time, I believe. I mean, with the exception of Excalibur, it's probably the best Lancelot and King Arthur film. You could argue it's actually better than Excalibur as far as being as close to the truth as possible, as far as how much of a pain in the neck it was to wear armour, especially when it got wet. There's lots of clanking about. I mean, people watching Lancelot de Lac expecting a King Arthur film who have never seen a Robert Bresson film might be a little bit confused. The jousting scene is wonderful. It's all done in close-up, and it's just kind of bits of wood hitting bits of other wood. There will be beleaguered characters walking into rooms, saying a line and then sighing and then turning around and clanking out of a room. But it's compelling. It's absolutely beautifully shot, the greens and browns as it is in colour. Just the feeling of time and place in that time period was not a great place to live in, and you really get that sense. This is not the shiny armoured world of Excalibur or First Knight or anything like that. This is grim, even though it does look absolutely gorgeous. I don't know whether it's my favourite Bresson. I think Pickpocket might still be my favourite Bresson. I know that one's mainstream. But Lancelot de Lac is so good and such a masterpiece, and again, it might be the ultimate King Arthur film. Next, at number 4, is a film that I absolutely adore, which sort of rhymes. And this was the reason that I dipped my toe into a new boutique label that I have dipped my toe in several times since. It's The Gambler by Carol Rice. It's just an absolute masterpiece with James Caan, probably James Caan's best performance. It's so 70s. It's arguably, well, I was about to say it's only my 4th favourite film of 1974, but it is one of my favourite films of the 70s. James Caan stars as a college professor, which might be a little bit of a stretch, who is addicted to gambling. But again, he's not really that interested in winning. It is just a metaphysical, psychological film. He comes from a really rich family. but he likes punishing himself. It's just so up my street. It was remade by Mark Wahlberg, which I have never seen, and I'm not ever going to see it, even though John Goodman's in it. Paul Sorvino is in it, who plays one of his bookies, and he gives a fantastic turn. Lauren Hutton's in it, who gives a wonderful turn. Written by James Toback, produced by Irvin Winkler. It's just so good. Again, it was one of those films that I think I'd mentioned it. It was just on DVD, and I wished it got Blu-ray, and then I saw Imprint released it, and then unfortunately I have went down the Imprint rabbit hole somewhat, and this was the first Imprint I bought because I was just so desperate to see it in Blu-ray. It looks fantastic. It has that 70s look, but again, it's just so downbeat. The ending is just wonderful. Some people might be unsatisfied with the ending, but I absolutely adore the ending. It sums up James Caan's character so well. It's an absolute masterpiece. It's 5 stars all the way. Absolutely seminal. You can let me know if you've seen the remake if you really want to, but I don't. That's a film I will happily never see. Now, number 3. Excuse me. Number 3 is the epitome of a favourites list and not the best or the greatest list. It's, of course, The Beast Must Die. Is this the last Amicus horror film? I mean, I've talked about this on the channel enough times. I just adore this film. It has one major flaw, as in it's a werewolf film, but the werewolf is not impressive in any way. As much as I love it, it's almost one of those films that you wish you could remake yourself and try and at least get the beast a bit better. This is an all-star cast. Calvin Lockhart as the big game hunter who has invited a group of people around with the express idea of hunting a werewolf because he thinks one of them's a werewolf, because they all have dubious histories where odd things have happened when they've been around. Peter Cushing co-stars as, I think he's a Swedish professor, and his accent is all over the place, but you don't care. A very young Michael Gambon, couldn't remember his name. Wonderful Charles Gray, Anton Diffring. I mean, we all love Anton Diffring. It's just so good. Granted, there's a flaw. There is a nice werewolf break where you can guess who the werewolf is. It's endlessly rewatchable because when you watch the first time and find out who the werewolf is, you can then watch their behaviour throughout the film. Again, is it flawed? Of course it is, but it's just a film I absolutely adore. It scared me witless as a child, and then of course watching it now, there's absolutely nothing scary in it whatsoever. There's wonderful scenes that would end up being not necessarily copied in later films, but certainly influenced. Its setup is wonderful because it is like an Agatha Christie and then there were none, but there's a werewolf in it. It's just an absolute blast. And again, when Indicator announced this, I just had a big smile on my face. Of course, at that point, I'd already bought the Severin Blu-ray, so so I have this twice, but I don't care because it's absolutely wonderful. It is literally my third favourite film of 1974, even though objectively it's hardly a great film, but I just love it. And again, this was the next one at number 2. Is another film that when it was announced it was finally getting a Blu-ray, because we thought it never was going to get a Blu-ray. I was ecstatic, and then within maybe 2 or 3 months, 2 companies released it in Blu-ray, and of course I accidentally have both editions. It's Warren Beatty's greatest performance. It's the parallax view. by Alan Pakula. This is probably the least appreciated out of his trilogy of Paranoia, with Clute and All the President's Men. This was the one sandwiched in between, and this is straight up great. Shot by the Prince of Darkness himself, Gordon Willis, has that 70s look. Warren Beatty, who I'm not a huge fan of, this is his best work, as he is a journalist who investigates. An ex-girlfriend, Paula Prentice, comes to him and is paranoid because she was there when a president was assassinated, or presidential candidate, or even a senator, was assassinated in the Seattle Space Needle. It's an amazing scene. And all these witnesses start dying, and she thinks she's going to be next. And then Warren Beatty gets involved and starts seeing connections and investigating, and the deeper he gets, he finds this corporation called the Parallax Corporation, and he investigates them further and gets into all manner of hijinks. There's like bizarre scenes involving drinking milk. There's wonderful supporting performances by Hume Cronin, for example. He's just wonderful in the film. It's so great. It's still relevant. Of course, it's inspired by the Kennedy assassination and the report after it. But again, I could literally just watch this all day long. I could watch it once a week quite happily, as you should do with your favourite films. Okay, maybe not Come and See. It's just a straight up masterpiece, and you haven't seen it, it's also available in Criterion, Region A, Parallax View. Spectacular. But compiling this list and trying to compare even the top 5 and kind of going, well, what is the film that I probably watched the most from 1974? It's one of those films that my dad introduced me to, and I ended up absolutely adoring it as well. I don't know what that says, but it's the Taking a Pelham 123. This is the 4K from Kino Lorber, which actually looks surprisingly good. I really had kind of low expectations of the 4K, but the 4K actually looks really good, considering it was shot in 1974. This is just, it's an absolute blast. Again, we'll not talk about the abomination of the remake, but at least they changed the ending in the remake with John Travolta. I mean, John Travolta or Robert Shaw, I don't know. Denzel Washington or Walter Matthau, don't know. It's perfectly paced. Even having seen it like 72 times. I was going to say 123 times, but I'm not quite there. You still go, how are they going to do it? Even though you've seen it so many times. The script is just razor sharp, directed really effectively and economically by Joseph Sargent. Great performances. Robert Shaw is just brilliant. Walter Matthau's perfect, but again, wonderful support. Hector Alonso, Martin Balsam. It's got a real kind of grittiness that captures the filth of New York, 1974. The mayor is hilarious. It just has such a great atmosphere and feel. It's just absolutely perfect. And again, I could happily watch the Taking a Pelham 123 once a week as well, because it's just so good. Again, when you have a really good script and you have talent like Matthau and Shaw, it's just absolutely sublime. Obviously the influence of the colour-coded names. But as far as heist films, it's fairly unique as far as hijacking a train, a subway train. It's funny, but it's natural humour. It's brutal. Part of you actually wants the hijackers to get away with it, which again is a wonderful balance, and people don't always get that balance right. But there is a part of you that actually wants Robert Shaw to succeed, even though he is a baddie. So that's my favourite 10 films from 1974, the year I was thrust into this tornado of sadness that we call life. Again, I'm sure these won't be your 10 favourites, and I apologise that some masterpieces have been left off. Obviously, if I did the best films in 1974, that would be a different list, because let's be honest, the beast must die is on here. But please let me know what your 10 favourite films from 1974 are, or the 10 favourite films from your birthing year. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't shout at me too much for not having The Godfather Part 2 on the list. And thank you very much for watching. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.